Welcome along to this afternoon's webinar, where we will be celebrating the launch of Critical Illness, which is a brand new content set from here at Pharmaceutical Press. So I would like to welcome everyone for coming along. We've got 68 people so far on the call, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm just going to share my screen now and get kicked off. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. So my name is Kerry Aikman. I'm the head of new content here at Pharmaceutical Press, which is the knowledge business of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. We're so excited about this new product, and so I'd like to take the time to say thank you everybody for joining us here in this celebration from wherever you are in the world. I'm based in London, and we've got lots of people here from the United Kingdom, including our editors-in-chief, who I'll introduce you to in a second. But looking through the list of attendees, we've also got a really international flavour, which is fantastic. So we've got people from Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Hong Kong, South Africa, Palestine, Italy, Singapore, the UAE, Pakistan, United States, Vietnam, Colombia, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Greece, Ireland, India, Japan, Nigeria, Cyprus, Portugal, Cameroon, Kenya, Canada, Germany, Finland, Peru, Kazakhstan, Hungary, Cayman Islands, Israel, Iran, Ghana, Egypt, Norway, Namibia, Switzerland, Bahrain, and a shout out to my home nation of New Zealand. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being part of this. As a former hospital pharmacist myself, I'm all too aware of all the challenges that have been faced by pharmacists, doctors, nurses, and the whole multidisciplinary team over the last 12 months, both here in the UK, as we're still in the midst of the lockdown, and also across the world. So I just want to take this introduction just to acknowledge everybody on this call who have been working tirelessly during this pandemic to support what really matters the most, and that's our patients. So thank you. With the release of Critical Illness, we've been really glad here that Pharmaceutical Press, we've been able to support those frontline teams. And this new guidance will provide specific information to help make confident and effective decisions in critical care, which is obviously such a high risk environment. So today's webinar, what we want to do is kind of go through the journey and discuss with you how we came about this product, where it all started, how it was created, and then I'll give a bit of a demonstration, show you some features, and then we'll have a panel discussion with our editors-in-chief who are waiting in the wings in their hospitals at the moment. Greg and Barbara, you've got your scrubs on, ready to go. So this will be recorded and shared with everybody afterwards. But please, we want it to be as interactive as you can make it on a Zoom call. And so please utilize the Q&A section where you can ask questions, and I will be your MC and ask the questions through to our editors-in-chief. So with that, I would like to introduce you. Sorry, I'd like to introduce you to our three editors-in-chief. So Barbara, Kathy, and Greg, they've been pivotal in the development of this publication, and they've worked around the clock along with our other experts, whilst also continuing their patient-facing roles to ensure the release of this content. So live from the wards, Barbara, can you introduce yourself first?
Hello, my name is Barbara Phillips. I'm an intensivist, so I'm a clinician working with a wonderful set of pharmacists to develop this. And I work at the Brighton and Sussex Hospital, and I'm part of the Brighton and Sussex Medical School.
Thank you, Barbara. Kathy.
Hi there all. So I'm Cathy McKenzie. I'm an academic pharmacist now, clinical academic at King's College Hospital. I've worked in and around critical care for many, many years, since about 1994. Come into a new academic role about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, but stepped up again to provide some clinical pharmacy to my colleagues here at King's College Hospital.
Thanks, Kathy. And that leaves Greg.
Hi everyone, my name's Greg Barton. I'm a critical care and burns pharmacist up in the northwest of England, near Liverpool. I've been doing crit care since 2004, and I, for about a decade, near enough, chaired the United Kingdom Clinical Pharmacy Association's critical care group, and did an MPhil looking at antibiotic kinetics in critically ill patients.
And he was recently awarded an MBE, which is a real recognition of all of his hard work recently. So well done, Greg. So critical illness, I guess, why have we decided to create a product around critical illness? And the aim is to provide evidence and expert opinion for those working in prescribing and review of patients in critical care. As a lot of people probably on this call will know, that most resources don't take into account any of the effects of acute illness, organ failure, and all of the dramatic and rapidly changing impacts on drug pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And I guess this is where standard resources don't quite aren't as useful, I guess, in order to make decisions about patient care in this really challenging environment. So what we wanted to do was support a new philosophy, which we're calling dynamic prescribing, which is adjusting those doses based on the individual patients. As we all know, critical care patients are at risk of harm from drugs, and also some forms that are obviously more toxic than others. So toxicity caused by accumulation is often considered, and drug interactions. But what is often not as noticeable or not as noted is the harm caused by the inadequate dosing, which is exacerbated by the pharmacokinetics of critically ill patients. And the evidence and the literature around this field has developed quite significantly over the last few years, and a lot of that information has ended up here in this resource. And one of those that I would say would be the most notable is the pharmacokinetics of the beta-lactam antibiotics, which again have really shown that need for dynamic prescribing. And so we here, Pharmaceutical Press and our expert team, we've reviewed the literature. We've drawn on the extraordinary expertise of clinicians from not only in the UK, but also the international critical care community to provide our information and recommendations based on knowledge, evidence, and grounded in clinical practice. We're regularly reviewing our content as the science evolves. So we do want this to be a community project. So we welcome anyone on this call and any of your colleagues for contributions, new evidence, anyone that would like to help us with reviews. It has definitely been a collaborative effort. And I think one of the things that we want to celebrate today is that community involvement, and to thank everybody, of which I know there are a lot of people on this call, for their involvement. So as I've mentioned, this has been a collaborative effort, and it's been the direct result of a lot of energy and dedication of a full team, not just the three on this call. And there's been over about 70 critical care colleagues from the UK and around the world. Hopefully some of them have been able to join. Annie, I can see that you're there from New Zealand at some ungodly hour, so hopefully you have a nice strong coffee there in front of you, Annie, as well as others, obviously from internationally as well. So I kind of wanted to explain to you a bit of the history, how we got here, and then go through the editorial process, because here at Pharmaceutical Press, our process is something that we really pride ourselves on, having that independent rigor, real critical appraisal of the information, and able to then package that in a way that's really concise and able to be used by customers at the patient bedside. So our editors-in-chief, who you've met, is obviously Barbara, Kathy, and Greg. They've then been supported by our editors. So these are people with vast expertise and critical care specialism to ensure that everything reflects the best clinical practice. So these are our editors, and I'd like to say a big thank you to them. Then we've got expert contributors. So again, this is an international team of experts that we've asked to review our content. There are a smattering of people here who are critical care specialists, some medics, some pharmacists, as well as those working in renal and in antimicrobial stewardship roles, which we felt was really important to include as well. And finally, our advisors, which have provided their expert opinion and independent advice. This has been especially, as you can imagine, in practice, where the evidence has been a bit lacking, or where we've needed to go out and ask experts what they've been doing in practice and their opinion on things. And a lot of that has, again, been around those renal doses, how to dose antimicrobials, and ECMO as well. So let's go back right to the start. And we obviously knew that there was a clear need for this content set. But it really was a birth that came from clinical practice. So Chris Kerwin, he was one of our original founding editors. Him and Kathy first met at a conference quite a few years ago now. And between Kathy, Barbara, and other colleagues formed a working group where I think I'd probably be fair to say that it was felt that you wanted a BNF for ICU or something similar, which is why we were then approached Pharmaceutical Press here with this idea for a new content set. So with that, I thought I would introduce who Pharmaceutical Press are. Some of you may be aware of who we are and the publications that we author. But for those of you who aren't, we are the knowledge business of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. And we invest all of our resources into creating world-class tools that promote best practice in medicine's use so that healthcare professionals can quickly and confidently make really informed decisions. So some of our tools that you may be familiar with are things like the British National Formulary. We also have Martindale, Stockley's, Martindale's ADR checker, the Palliative Care Formulary, amongst many of our other publications. And so when we were approached with this idea to create a new resource around critical illness, we of course decided that was such a good thing to invest in, and we can see it being such a valuable tool again to promote patient safety, which is our focus. So we decided to publish it as an online resource for patient care at the point of care for evidence-based knowledge and to help with decision making. So from us taking the plunge and deciding to go ahead with this, a few things happened, I guess, namely COVID-19. And so I guess when this obviously happened, it really established the clear need for this content and the need for this content to get out and be used as quickly as possible. So some of you on this call may be aware that we launched an advanced edition of this publication, which was in April, which sounds like it's a long time ago, but it feels like it was yesterday. And so we launched 6 monographs, which were available to anyone working in the NHS and also any customers of Medicines Complete. Greg obviously enjoyed his experience working with us on the advanced edition, and so we managed to rope him in as an editor-in-chief in May. And then pretty much from May until the launch, we've been working really hard in order to get the content up and out there, recruiting lots of specialists and going through our editorial processes, as I mentioned, to then be where we are today, which is nearly a month after the launch, which is a fantastic achievement to have made it onto this other side. As I mentioned, Pharmaceutical Press pride ourselves on our editorial rigor and our independent content creation, as people who are familiar with the BNF and the governance around that would come to expect from our products. And so I wanted just to explain to you all of the process that goes into making a monograph. So we've had things go through what we call a write, review and approve. So things going through a number of eyes. We really wanted to make sure there's such a high risk environment, and we really wanted to make sure that everything was based on evidence, based on clinical practice, and involved as many people as possible. A lot of content or a lot of information that's used in critical illness is based on things that are not licensed. They're based on anecdotal evidence, or they're based on poor quality clinical trials because they've only been in case reports or things like that. So this rigor that went behind everything was really important for us, and something that makes the product really valuable. So without further ado, and I've probably talked a million miles an hour, I thought I would give you a bit of a demonstration of the product. And it's fantastic to see that there's over 100 people joined today, so you can see that there's 113 there. Please do continue to comment on the questions and answers so that we can have a really good QA session later. I've seen one that's come in there. So for those of you familiar, this is Medicines Complete. This is our homepage of Medicines Complete, and you can access critical illness directly from the homepage or through here via our search here, where you can type in your drug name and search. I'm going to go in this way, and our information is laid out in 3 ways. We've got our drug monographs, prescribing guidance, and then all of our processes and about section. In our drug monographs, we want everything follows a very standard process. So let's go to something like apixaban, I guess. So every monograph follows a standard structure, and we intend that this is used at the patient bedside, and it's supported by your own local guidelines and your own clinical practice. So everything has its own standard format. Everything has an introduction, indications and doses, how to give it, any dose adjustments that you need, such as those in acute kidney injury or CKD, pharmacology, so that all the pharmacodynamics, pharmacokinetics, and then some further information about optimal care. So just going through this here, we've decided to have information kept to a minimum. So things that you can look at a snapshot when you're potentially on a ward round or reviewing a patient. And more comprehensive information is hidden away here in the rationale sections, which provide more of a commentary on the use and practice, detailed evidence behind the recommendations, and expert appraisal. So you can see when you click through things here, a bit more of the rationale and information. We felt that this was very important to go through our dose adjustment sections. So we have information on acute kidney injury, augmented renal clearance, CKD, SLED, all of those types of dose adjustments that are required, and again, having different rationale sections. Pharmacology is obviously important for us pharmacists who like to geek out on the pharmacodynamics. And finally is our pharmacokinetic tables. I'm just zooming in and out here so you can see it a bit clearer. But this goes through specific all of the different types of pharmacokinetics, and then the changes that one might expect in the critically ill. As I mentioned at the start, this was a clear focus for us to understand how those changes then affect doses and dose adjustments. And finally, going through monitoring interactions, side effects, and cautions with a fully referenced list, so people can see where that information has come from, and can maybe turn to the literature should they need to. Just going to go and show you another one just to give you a bit of an example. Meropenem is quite an in-depth monograph, as Kathy, I can see smiling along there. What I want to show you here, and I'm just zooming a little bit so hopefully you can see it a little bit more, is evidence grading. So information we've tried to pull upon the clinical trials and the best information that's available in the literature. However, sometimes we've had to base this on the best practice and the consensus opinion of our editors and our editors-in-chiefs, because there has been no information, or that information is unlicensed. And where that is, we've done what we call evidence grading. So you'll see it here has been graded to say that this here is expert opinion. And so that's based upon our expert advice. I'll see if I can find another example here, and perhaps in our indication and dosing sections. This is a good example of the rationale where we've got information quite concise, and then further information here on meropenem around things like the MIC, targeted strategies, the differences between continuous infusions or prolonged infusions, and again, things very clearly referenced to the literature, but also here with that expert opinion. So I thought that would that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I guess, of critical illness. In our initial launch, we launched with 45 monographs, and our plan is that we will continually update this information. I can see that's been a question that's been asked by Wendy. Hello, Wendy. And yes, we will be updating them as new information becomes available. We've got lots of monographs waiting in the wings. We released last week acyclovir and amiodarone, and we are planning to continually update our information. Just to let you know as well, for everybody that is on this call, we've prepared a case study which demonstrates and goes through everything that I've just spoken about, and explains how this resource can be used, and some of those features around, the pharmacokinetic table and things with the expert opinions and stuff like that. So everybody here on this webinar will get a free copy sent to you afterwards. So I think I've done enough talking now. And so I would like to introduce again our editors-in-chief. So that's Greg, Kathy and Barbara, and say a big thank you. So please keep your questions coming through. I can see there's been some there. So I will, I'll fire away. So I think my first question that I would like to ask is for you. Let's go with you, Kathy. How do you see this being used in clinical practice, and have you used it yourself?
Great question. Thank you, Kerry. And thanks from myself and all the other editors-in-chief to all the contributors and editors and in-house contributors as well. It's a real team effort, actually. Everyone we reached out was really willing to give their time and their expertise. How do I see it being used? I think one of our main motivations to do it was to ensure that critical care patients perhaps that don't have a number of pharmacists, or perhaps less pharmacist visits, or less experienced intensivists, will have access to the best evidence-based practice. And I really see it sitting alongside local guidance. So local guidance, for example, on antimicrobials will be based on your local sensitivities. This should go alongside, for example, if there's in fact, the time I used it, there you go, it's an obese patient who's Pseudomonas, with augmented renal clearance on the ICU. And I was able to flick in really good now. I was able to use it to actually titrate the dosing for a very short period of time to help him. So, yeah.
Thank you. Barbara, I'd like to ask you, we've talked a lot around dynamic prescribing. What does this actually mean in practice?
Well, I think the thing that has become clear to all of us working in critical care is patients change. Their needs change. They come in, but perhaps somebody with sepsis will come in and be resuscitated with vast amounts of fluid. We then spend our time trying to support organs that might be failing. And all of these changes have impact on the pharmacokinetics of the drugs that we're giving. So no one dose is going to be adequate from beginning to end of a course. So in particular with antibiotics, you can't just start with a dose, expect it to get to the levels you need it to function at, and then stay at the optimum level till you finish. So although we can't do therapeutic drug monitoring for all the drugs we'd like to, there are ways we can rationalize about it, and we should be looking at drugs every day. So it's a dynamic approach to prescribing. We should be looking at our doses, thinking about our patients on a daily basis, and that's what we mean by dynamic.
That's great, thank you. This one's for Greg. We've also had a question to say, nice cycle shoes and cap, Greg. So that must be someone that you know there. I'd just like to say, so there's obviously lots of people here joining from overseas. Is this a UK specific publication, or is there an international aspect to it?
No, I think it's got to be an international aspect, and I think we've shown that by trying to involve experts worldwide in the development of the monographs. And a lot of the evidence base is international, so there'll be stuff specific to UK patients, but I think you know, the UK is a diverse place of ethnic origins and body sizes. You know, there's all sorts of factors that come into play, and so I think if you're going to have a complete resource, then it will obviously apply internationally as well. I think certain things, it's about getting all the information in one place as well, so it'd be remiss to leave out anything specific. We tried to even include, not necessarily on international front, but like a non-ITU indications for drugs, because again, that would seem remiss just to brush over stuff because you don't think it's actually relevant. But you know, we want it to be a complete resource for whatever patient is presented in front of you, so that you can quickly dip in, find the information, and if you know, if it's not clear from there, look on to the resources that we guide you to in the references, for example.
Thanks, Greg. I can see a few of you are asking questions around updates, and will they be updated in a rolling order when information comes to hand? How frequently will the updates occur, and the process that is? Someone else asked around the drugs to be kept up to date. And so that is really important for us to make sure that, as I mentioned, everything is changing so dramatically in practice. And so we do want to continually update that. At the moment, we're updating the content about every month or so, as information is there. We've got a whole backlog of drugs that we that didn't make the first release that we are wanting to include. And so I would encourage anyone to please get in touch with us if there's content that you think would like to be added, and we can have a look to that. Similarly, if anyone would like to help be involved in the process to authoring those. One of the questions was being notified of upcoming monographs. We will work with our marketing team around communications with you. We want to make sure that we involve you as much as possible. So we can have newsletters, and we've got social media presence where we'll let you know what monographs have been updated. Someone has asked, and I might defer this question maybe to you, Kathy, around what are we defining as critical care patients? Are those patients in ITU?
It's a very good question, isn't it? So I guess that goes back to 2000 critical care without walls. I mean, people get critical illness everywhere. And actually one of the aims of the book was to support the patient as they become unwell. I mean, there's certain monographs, of course, for example, fentanyl and propofol, that you'll only use in an ICU. But there are others, they're more bespoke for where you will use that drug, if that makes sense, rather than the location itself. So critical illness is a patient who is, I guess, more than level 0 care, level 1, wherever they become unwell.
Thank you. And just to confirm, is this for adult patients only?
Yes, at the moment. In fact, we've had that question already, haven't we? A lot of engagement from our colleagues in the paediatric critical care population, but we're going to, we'll leave that task to them. But yes, definitely just for adults for the moment.
Great. I can see a few people asking comments around subscriptions and access. I'll kind of explain at the end, but the sort of focus of today was around the clinical aspects of the content creation, and I'll defer you to our your individual account managers around getting access, because everyone's got their own distinct ways of accessing the product. Similarly, there was a question around an app. We don't have any plans at the moment for an app, but Medicines Complete is mobile responsive, so you can log in on the ward and have it on your iPad or on your phone. Someone has asked, and I'm going to go back to Barbara on this one. Is there any more general information or guidance on this dynamic prescribing, and where can we find it?
That's a good question. I think it's a concept that's coming out of the literature, particularly around beta-lactams, but increasingly other drugs. At the moment, it would be to the references that we've used for different monographs that have been developed. I think the concept that has come from the antibiotic prescribing is the striking number of patients who do not reach therapeutic levels in a timely fashion when they're being treated by sepsis. And we know that if patients fail to reach their therapeutic targets, then outcomes are affected. So really this has come from the antibiotic treatments, but actually it applies to so many drugs. And with the evidence for them is building. So we really are we'd like to think at the beginning of this, something new to develop and to start established as normal practice.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm going to go over to you, Greg. Who do you see using this resource the most?
Yeah, first, before I answer that, I'm going to carry on with the dynamic prescribing bit, which is, I think this resource is in critical illness. You could dip into every day. So somebody presents shocked, hyperdynamic circulation with maybe augmented renal clearance. You go to one section of the monograph for that. The next day, things are settled down, but the renal function is going off because of global hypoxia or something. And when you go to a different part of the resource, and that's the dynamic bit, is the patient changing in front of you. But hopefully this resource will cover a lot of those aspects. As for who will be using it, ideally anybody that's prescribing a drug. So whether that's the pharmacist or ACCPs or a doctor, nurse practitioners, whoever is prescribing a drug. I think in terms of administration, there are other resources for that, so that are linked within the document, and it's not necessarily going to give you information about what volume to put a drug in, but in terms of what dose to go for and how long for and how to adjust it for the patient in front of you, then that's what it's about. So it's aimed at the prescriber, the person who's initiating or reviewing the drug. So pharmacists, we'll call them clinicians.
Great. We've had a couple of questions around will the monographs only contain drugs registered in the UK, or will other drugs be suggested? I guess we're based here in the UK, so our primary focus will be on UK-based drugs. Does any of you three have any comments you'd like to make on that?
I guess if there's specific drugs that are not licensed, but you're aware that they're used internationally, just pop them into something pharmaceutical press. Is that right, Kerry? And then we'll put them. I mean, actually, I think our original list, Barbara, was something like 120, wasn't it? And we got whittled down to 50 for the first lot because it was so much work. But we've got another lot on waiting. But if there's something you feel very strongly about, do let us know, and we'll certainly consider it.
This one is an exciting one from Janine around genomics. What are your thoughts on including information on genomics in this publication? I'll go to you, Cathy. You look excited about that.
Thanks ever so much. That's very nice of you. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the impact of pharmacogenomics on drugs in ICU is a real tough one, actually, to actually define. So you do get different phenotypes on different enzyme responsiveness on terms of metabolism, but actually defining it for the individual patient in front of you, I think is still probably a bit of an unknown. There's so many confounders. Barbara might disagree with me because she's chuckling more, but I think for the moment it's probably undefined, but something to explore down the line.
Barbara, was there anything more that you wanted to add there yourself?
I think there may be drugs that we hit that is very relevant for things with ultra fast metabolisms, or versus normal metabolisms, where I think and I just thinking through the monographs we've got, I don't think we've hit anything that's particularly sensitive in this sense so far, but there will be one or two drugs where unusual responses in patients might be attributable to a genomics, and I think where it's very relevant that it will get mentioned. But until we can actually test these in patients, it's going to be difficult to use it as a guide to dosing. So, but it's possibly the future, and would help with the dynamic prescribing.
Thank you. Graham, thank you for your question. You've said critical care is a dynamic environment, new evidence continually emerging. What are your plans to update the information? And I guess for us, there are two parts to the content. There's adding new information and new drugs. As Cathy said, we've got a whole bunch waiting in the wing, and then there's going to be a whole bunch of making sure that what we do have for the current drugs are continually updated. So we'll be doing those two in tandem to make sure that everything is as updated as possible. And that will involve going back through the literature and making sure that as anything new has come to light or things have changed. And I guess that's why it's so important and really great for us to have been at Pharmaceutical Press, to be supported by you working in practice, Cathy, Greg, Barbara, and the rest of us, the rest of the team, will be, very important on the ground. Do any of you three want to comment on that at all? Greg?
Yeah, I think if, as well as the constant review process and the looking at the new monographs, I think it's worth saying that if we realise there's a big study's coming out and something's going to change practice, then we would review that monograph as a priority. And so I think the same goes that if, as we're saying, contact us if you want to contribute, contact us if you think we've said something wrong or something's changed or a new paper's come out and you want to check that we're going to take into account. I think something that sticks in my mind is the anti-epileptics for status. And over the last sort of year and a half, a lot's changed with a lot of them. And if we'd have written the levetiracetam monograph 2 years ago, we might have had a loading dose of 20 milligrams and then gone through 30 to 40 to 60. And that was without touching the maintenance dose, which I think that'll be the next thing that people start looking at. What is a maintenance dose after your loading dose if you're going to stay on levetiracetam? And so, you know, if another study came out next week, we'd hope we'd respond to that fairly rapidly. And so I think that's the plan. And that's the other dynamic element about the prescribing is that the book's dynamic, not just the patient.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We've got one here for Barbara. Barbara, do you know if critical care clinicians have been notified on this publication? It would be useful to have joint subscriptions with pharmacy departments, just an idea for people to take back to their workplace. I'm going to add another question on top of that and say, you're the medic here in a sea of pharmacists. How did you get involved and why is that so important?
Well, actually, the one thing, if you think about it, stop and think of the one thing that all doctors do, regardless of their specialty, with perhaps the exception of pathologists locked away in a cupboard, is every doctor has to prescribe things. And we are, as you probably, I'm probably not talking to an audience who will disagree with this, on the whole, our pharmacology knowledge is limited to the reading what's in many of the books, and that's not really good enough. Actually, it's the one thing we do. We can all cause harm by prescribing, whether it's from under prescribing or over prescribing or just prescribing wrongly. We rely heavily on our critical care pharmacists, but there aren't enough of you. And at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, you've got your young doctor prescribing really quite dangerous drugs, and there isn't somebody else to ask at that moment. So there's a desperate need for this sort of guide for doctors, keeping them safe. I would hope, and you know, I was very keen for the pharmacokinetics to go in, because I think doctors have to really understand that dynamic interaction between the drug and the person that you're giving them to, and the changes of the physiology. So actually, this is something I felt very passionate about. I did some research on cytochrome P450 enzymes, so that's how I sort of entered in an AKI. And once I'd met Kathy, it was, and then latterly Greg, it became a very real concept that this was a need for doctors so much. You know, in exactly the same way as it's going to be a useful resource to the critical care pharmacists. I would hope it makes us better and safer prescribers.
Well, we've just had a flurry of comments in support of you there, Barbara, saying yay, Barbara. And someone else saying very encouraged and excited by this work and the concept of dynamic prescribing. Definitely think we're moving from the one dose fits all prescribing, but we'll definitely need the infrastructure to support this. And it won't be long until such a time that the first blood test gets you an A&E is a genetic test. A few people have asked about joining the critical care community, and Louise is going to put in our contact details for you if you into this chat for people that are interested. Kathy, yes, hi.
I just wanted to add on that, particularly, you know, if you're interested in ICU or one of the, you know, areas I aligned, it's a really good way to get to understand and interpret the primary literature, to do the, you know, the contributing to 1 or 2 monographs. You'll gain so much by it. You have to work a bit, but we do gain a lot.
Thank you. So as you can see, oh, sorry, Greg.
No, I was just going to say, back to the original question about do medics or intensivists know about this? I suppose we've put it out there through FICM and the ICS, and so they've shared it, haven't they? And I think we've got some ongoing plans with the ICS to promote the publication.
I'm also hoping to put it out through the European Society as well, which will, I hope, that'll help the international knowledge of the publication.
That's great, thank you. I've had a couple of people here asking around unlicensed medicines. and how we've displayed unlicensed medicines. I guess we've not specifically called them out as unlicensed, mainly because that's based on UK practice. So we've referenced, so where things are in the BNF or licensed in the UK, we've not linked those. We've put links where things are unlicensed back to primary literature, and then used that expert opinion. Do you have any comments on that? And also, someone has asked around what about frail elderly critical care patients?
So I can answer both those. Well, yeah, I'll start and Kathy can go next.
Yeah, no, you go first, Greg. Yeah.
In terms of the whole unlicensed stroke off-label thing is tricky, isn't it? Because Propofol, I think, is still only licensed for 3 days. We know we use it for longer than that. And if it's not, dexmedetomidine certainly is, and so is Remy, I think. So there could be quite a lot of little asterisks. And so I suppose it needs to be used in conjunction with other references, sources really, and a knowledge of the drug from a licensing point of view, because we're purely talking largely about dosing in critical illness, aren't we? What was the question you then directed at me, which was?
Frail elderly critical.
Oh yeah, so that would fit really into the extremes of body weight, really, along with the sort of the pharmacokinetic stuff at the bottom. And again, the pharmacokinetic stuff at the latter part of the monograph ties into the genomics stuff as well. So I think if there was anything of note like morphine metabolism, say, then that would be in that section. So if there's something specific we were worried about with frail and elderly, that would go in the extremes of body weight section.
Can any of you think I can show an example if I'm putting you on the spot? You can think of a drug. Oh, Kathy, you're on mute, I think.
For our very favourite, which is meropenem. I think you'll find, so the frail elderly bit, for a number of them, we put as expert practice. So the big dose 2 grams TDS, I think we qualified it and said clearly, the dose for a young, fit gentleman may not be the same as an elderly, frail lady with low muscle mass. So we've tried to put that into context. That is expert practice based, as you all know. It's not there in the textbooks, but we have tried to context it wherever we can.
I'll just share my screen again and show you that example in practice. Hopefully you can see here Propofol just as an example. So again, quite a detailed monograph. We've got in the indications and doses and the dose adjustments, and so I'm going quite fast. Down here we've got not only the extremes of body weight and how to dose there, but then specific information on the elderly. So we have tried to call it out where possible. And this is another example here of the expert opinion. And as Greg mentions, with the pharmacokinetics, not as a big a deal here, I guess, with Propofol. I know that midazolam, we had information there around dosing and midazolam. Were there any other monographs that you three would like to show anybody, or I guess a favourite monograph from anybody, or a least favourite monograph maybe?
So I guess I could say one of the antipsychotics, if you have a look on haloperidol or clonidine. I know clonidine's not antipsychotic, but any of the drugs in agitation and delirium, we did try and keep up with the evidence here. So as many of you know, there's not a lot of evidence for antipsychotics to actually treat delirium as a phenomenon, but there is evidence for them to treat the agitation and motor symptoms. So we tried really hard to emphasize that in practice, that you should only really be using these in patients with mixed or hyperactive delirium who are really agitated. So I think it's quite a nice example of that. I think it's the same with clonidine. I mean, we all use it, don't we? Particularly in the UK, and of course that's the A to B study, but the evidence is not, there really isn't very much evidence for clonidine. And again, we've tried to put that in the monograph, but at the same time, describe how much we use it in practice. It's a tricky one, clonidine.
I've got a couple of other questions. Barbara, probably this one for you. Does this include pulmonary critical care?
That's a reasonable question. Depends what you mean by pulmonary critical care. So, I mean, this is aimed at the whole of the general intensive care population. So if you're talking about inhaled or nebulized drugs, they'll be there when they are useful. I don't think we've got any in the monographs at the moment, but anything that's used in intensive care will eventually get into the website. And we've done a very sort of basic. Well, what we've tried to do with this first set of monographs is work out which are going to be the most useful monographs to people generally. But in the UK, we don't have a sort of separate pulmonary intensive care. So drugs will come in according to their organ uses as they fall into the whole set. So it's not very well answered, but yes, it will include pulmonary intensive care drugs, but I'm trying to think specifically if we've got anything at the moment, and I don't think it's reached there yet.
I'll just throw another question at you, Barbara, while you're there, which is around drugs that have not typically been used for critical care, but have been because of COVID. What are your thoughts on, is there anything COVID related in here? And is there a plan for things such as tocilizumab or others? Greg's lit up, haven't you, Greg? Barbara, I'll let you go first.
And then yes. I mean, things have changed. I mean, one of the earliest changes was how we use enoxaparin. We are using it differently from when we started writing the monograph, because it was one of our early drugs to submit. And by the time COVID had happened, our monograph had changed quite considerably. So also with the, I don't know if it's happened everywhere, but certainly in the UK, we now have access to anti-10A levels in a way that we didn't before. So we're able to use a much more targeted dose of that. We also include voriconazole as an early drug, and things like tocilizumab will have to be there. These drugs will come into it when we are confident that they're going to stay as normal practice.
Our ongoing, sorry, Greg, I've interrupted you, but you can answer this as well. What about ongoing clinical trials, so such as the A to B study for clonidine and Dexmed?
Did you want me to answer?
Yeah, amongst.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say stuff to reiterate what Barbara was saying to some extent is with the COVID stuff, anything that's moving so rapidly, we can only be so dynamic, to use a word we've used quite a lot of times in this presentation. But, you know, when the evidence is changing before you can press share on your draft document, it becomes very hard. So we shied away from a few of we were going to have a COVID specific section, and we kind of shied away from that for now. But I think, as Barbara says, if something becomes sustained practice, then that will end up in the monographs. I think so. The same for the clinical trials. I think we've say meropenem and TAS, we've drawn attention to the fact that we're not trying to promote any specific practice. We're saying these are the options. And so with the beta-lactams, you know, we've given the option of standard dosing, standard administration practices versus extended practices versus continuous infusions, and not said you should do one or the other. But then they've said Bling 3, you know, is there in the wings, it's running, and hopefully the results will shed some light onto it. And it would then come back to what you're saying with, say, A to B, SPICE, you know, whatever studies around sedation, we will include them once the peer-reviewed and published as a formal, you know, inclusion, but we'll allude to them whilst we're developing the monographs.
I just thought I'd give you a real life example here.
A to B.
Yeah, no, I'm about to show it, Kathy. I'm about to show it. This is
that was said in.
So this is dexmedetomidine, and we've got the indications here. And again, this is sort of highlighting the importance of the rationale section. So when you click here on the rationale, we've got really in-depth information, and you mentioned the A to B, which is just here, as well as the other studies, as Greg said, around SPICE and SEDCOM and PRODEX. So I think thank you everybody for sharing all those questions. I do have one more myself, and it's something that I have struggled to get my head around, and I know that you're all very passionate about, is around acute kidney injury, chronic kidney disease, GFRs, KDIGO. What do I do, and how do I use this resource to help me? Should we do a round table? Kathy, should we go with you first? No?
No, you're going to go with Barb first for that one.
Let's go to Barbara.
Baby.
Okay, this has been a bugbear, as Kiri's alluded, for a long time. CKD and AKI are not the same disease. They're both syndromes, first of all, and they have very different etiologies and outcomes. And what we've done is we've conflated CKD and AKI into the same thing in order to prescribe drugs, and probably accounts for a lot of the underdosing of drugs, actually, because people see a creatinine going up, they decide somebody's developed an AKI, perhaps a bit oliguric, and the immediate response is to reduce the dose of whichever drug you're on, without thinking about the other dynamic changes that have happened to the pharmacokinetics and the need for that drug to be at a critical concentration at a certain point. Now, it's quite likely if you're going to stay on a drug after its initial, the initial first 24 to 48 hours, that you're going to want to reduce the drug or either by decreasing the dose or increasing the time, but you're going to have to do it against a rather uncertain picture. One thing we know is that estimated GFRs are not representative of renal function in AKI. They've all been validated in CKD, and they can be very different to the true GFRs, so they're difficult to use. So we're using the KDIGO criteria to guide people into when they should be anxious about dosing a patient and when they shouldn't. And then we've added in a section of CKD, because this is rather a passion of Cathrine, and that is that CKD patients with a different background, with a different illness, are probably more prone to accumulation of drugs than your average AKI patient, even if when the AKI is quite bad. So these patients probably do need to be more cautious about, and I'm not going to say a lot about it because I hand over to Kathy for that one, but they are very different, and we've got to start thinking of them differently. And we've got to start looking for ways of better assessing these conditions so that we can inform our prescribing better. That's my piece.
Thanks, Barbara. That's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's
did anyone?
I was just going to add, I agree with CKD. I mean, I think that's one of my observations from critical care clinical practice is the CKD patients appear to be the ones that accumulate drugs more. You know, they can even be on renal replacement therapy, and we might modify ever so slightly, but actually in that patient, we probably should have modified quite a lot more. And you do see that when one does see more toxicity in these drugs, these patients. So we try to reflect that. It's difficult then to interpret it, but we did try our best to reflect it.
I've just got one thing to add, if I can, which is just that it's not just about the CKD and AKI are not just about the kidneys, basically, and that's where the fundamental difference lies, isn't it?
Someone else is also, I'm sorry.
It's what's happened to the rest of the organs as well, and that's why they're not the same.
We've also had a question around the dosing of hemofiltration and whether that differs as well for other publications and in this publication.
So I'll say, I think some of the dosing already from CRRT or renal replacement therapy comes from the renal drug handbook, doesn't it? And it's a very small section. And I think probably I think even the original authors would say we probably overuse the renal drug handbook in this population. We've tried really hard to reflect renal replacement therapy in the ICU and different stages of renal replacement therapy. All the information is not there, but where we can, we've taken, a pragmatic approach and given expert-based practice.
Thank you. Someone has just said, for now, the drug monographs are around the safe dosing of a drug, and will there be any information around like syndromes and best practice for a selection of drugs? And to answer that, I guess that was always our intention with the prescribing guidance. We've got information there just around dosing and renal impairment and things like that. And as the publication grows, it's certainly an area that we want to focus on more, I would say.
Yeah, I think we'd like to have a review of that, wouldn't we?
Perfect. So what I'm going to do is go back to our discussion. Thank you all for joining. It's been a really great discussion. As we've said, we've had so many people internationally join us, people at different time zones, which has been absolutely fantastic. I just want to say that if anyone would like to get in touch, please do. we've got an email address that has been shared for anyone that has any comments, further questions. We will also be hosting another webinar, which will be a bit more clinical focused around patient care, following a case study, which is for RPS members, which will be on the 8th of April at 7 p.m. That's the UK time. And anyone that's interested, I know a lot of people have asked around access, pricing, subscriptions. Please contact us here on this email. We'll direct you to the right person who'll be able to help answer that for you, as well as having a setting up of a free trial for you. What I'd just like to do is just go back to our editors-in-chief just for one final closing comment. So, Greg, anything that you'd like to say?
Just that I think this resource has been lacking, and I know anybody that's a crit care pharmacist or clinician out there will know that you quite often have to go to multiple resources and resort to Google to try and find an answer quite a lot of the time. And hopefully we've tied a lot of these things together in one monograph that will give people an up-to-date, reliable place that they can find 95% of what they were hoping to find out. And if not, it will direct them to the places to further answer the questions.
Thanks, Greg. What about you, Kathy?
So I think one of the nicest comments on social media was someone saying it's a game changer. And we really hope it is, particularly right now. You know, we've seen a lot of patients with multi-resistant gram-negative infections because of long time in ICU, exposure to steroids in our COVID population. And actually, I think the timeliness of giving antimicrobial dosing that suits different gram-negative will really help meet a need. That was too long.
That's great, thanks, Kathy. Just to echo that, we've had Annie from New Zealand saying, well done to the team. She started using it in practice, more promoting it to the ICU and Australian community. Barbara, off to you.
Well, I've got to finish by actually saying that this has only happened because of the people involved, and it's been a huge effort by a very wide range of enthusiastic, interested people. We've had pharmacists from around the world, we've had clinicians from, again, around the world, and all putting in a great deal of time and effort. And of course, we've had the publishers as well, who've kept us really going, and it's all happened because of that. And I'd like to think that going forward, that it does grow, that we do develop it as we intend, and that we remain a dynamic publication so that people are invited to say, hey, what about, or have you thought of? Because it's such a vast area that we've got to stay responsive to get it right. So thank you to everyone.
Just to say a big thank you again to everybody who's been involved. I'm seeing lots of lovely things on the chat here with the Q&A to say congratulations, phrases reiterating that it is a game changer. And I guess it's all about being used in practice. So I would just like to say thank you to everybody who's come along to this webinar. Thank you to everybody who's been involved. Going through the participants list just before, I've seen a lot of familiar names of, again, experts, editors, advisors, and obviously the people here at Pharmaceutical Press who've been involved as well. So it's been a real collaborative effort. It's come at just such a timely time for patient care, and I will see it and support it going from strength to strength. So have a lovely afternoon. I hope you all stay safe and take care of each other wherever it is that you're calling from around the world. So thank you very much, and you'll hear from us soon.